She told me to find you before she died. She was on her knees at my wife's grave, both hands pressed flat against the stone, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. I stood there with gardenias in my hand, staring at a complete stranger falling apart over Grace's name. The name I had been the only one to visit for 2 years at this hour, at this grave. My chest locked, my jaw clenched. The anger hit before anything else, before confusion, before questions, pure white-hot rage. Because this grave was the last thing in this world that still belonged only to me. And she was taking it. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Grace's story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love loss and what the dead leave behind. I have a ritual. It is the only ritual I have kept without breaking, without negotiating with myself, without waking up one Sunday morning and deciding that maybe this week I could let it slide. Every Sunday before the sun finishes rising over the Chesapeake Bay, I am already in the car. I stop at Brenda's flower stand on Route 2, even though Brenda's doesn't open until 7, and I have to leave $2 under the little clay pot she keeps on the corner of her table because she knows I'll be there before she is. I always take white gardenias. Grace said gardenias smelled like the first day of something good. She said that once early in our marriage, when I brought her a single stem, just because I had seen them through a shop window and thought of her face. She pressed her nose into the petals and said, "Daniel, this is what the beginning of every good thing smells like." I never bought her roses after that. I drive to Chesapeake Memorial Cemetery with the gardenias on the passenger seat. The roads are empty at that hour. The world has not started up yet, and for about 20 minutes on that drive, I am not a widower. I am not a man with an apartment that still smells faintly like someone else's shampoo. I am just a husband on his way to see his wife. That is the lie I allow myself for 20 minutes every week, and it is the most peace I have found in 2 years. Grace died on a Tuesday morning in April. Brain aneurysm. She was 39 years old, 12 years into her nursing career, and she had just finished a night shift. She was in the parking lot of the hospital where she had spent the last decade saving other people's lives. She made it to her car. She sat down in the driver's seat. And then Grace was gone, and the world continued without her permission. There was no goodbye. There was no last conversation. There was no chance for me to say any of the things I had assumed I would eventually say, because we were supposed to have decades left. We had just put a deposit on a vacation to Portugal that neither of us would ever take. She had 3 library books on the nightstand she never finished. Her coffee mug was still in the kitchen cabinet right where she'd left it after her last cup the morning before that Tuesday shift. I have not moved it. I cannot explain exactly why, except that moving it feels like agreeing to something I am not ready to agree to. That was 2 years ago. People tell you that grief gets easier with time. I think those people mean well. I also think they have never sat in a cemetery in the dark, talking to a headstone, trying to remember the exact sound of someone's laugh before it starts to go quiet at the edges of your memory. It does not get easier. It gets different. You learn to carry it differently, like switching a heavy bag from one shoulder to the other. The weight does not change. You just get more practiced at walking with it. I am telling you all of this so you understand what that Sunday morning meant to me. So you understand why. When I turned the corner past the old oak tree and saw a figure kneeling at Grace's grave, something in my chest did not just tighten. It snapped. She was a woman. Maybe late 30s, maybe 40. Her jacket was dark navy blue, I think, and it was damp at the knees and the elbows from where she had been kneeling on the wet grass. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. One hand was pressed flat against Grace's headstone, palm open like she was trying to feel something through the granite. And she was crying. Not the polite, dignified kind of crying that people do in public when they are trying to keep it together. She was sobbing. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere low in the body, the kind that mean you have been holding something enormous for a very long time, and your body has simply decided it cannot do that anymore. I stopped walking. My fingers tightened around the gardenias. Part of me, the rational part, the part that was once a reasonable human being before grief knocked all the reasonable parts loose, knew I should feel compassion. A woman was crying, clearly in pain, in a cemetery, which is a place designed specifically for that kind of pain. The compassionate response would have been to give her space, or to ask gently if she was all right. But she was at Grace's grave. Grace's specific grave, at Grace's specific hour, at the one place in the world that I had held on to like a life preserver for 2 years. I walked forward. My footsteps crunched on the gravel path, and she heard me, and looked up, and I saw her face for the first time. Red around the eyes. Pale. She had the kind of face that might be pretty under other circumstances in a quiet, unremarkable way. But right now, it just looked like someone who had driven a very long distance carrying something very heavy. "This is a private," I started, and then I stopped, because I realized how idiotic that sentence was going to sound. Cemeteries are not private. I do not own Grace's grave. I own exactly nothing except a 2-bedroom apartment full of another woman's things that I cannot bring myself to donate. I tried again. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice came out harder than I intended. She got to her feet. She was not as tall as Grace, not as steady either. She pressed one hand briefly to the top of the headstone as she stood like she needed the balance, and then she looked at me and she said, "Are you Daniel Whitmore?" That stopped me cold. She knew my name. This stranger on her knees at my wife's grave at 6 in the morning knew my full name. "Yes," I said, slowly, like I was giving something up. She exhaled. It came out shaky, like she had been rehearsing for something, and the moment had arrived ahead of schedule. "My name is Rachel Bennett," she said. "My father told me to find you before he died." I stood there in the early morning cold, and I did not say anything. I did not know what to say. The gardenias were still in my hand. I was suddenly very aware of how ridiculous I must look standing there with flowers staring at a woman who had just told me her dead father sent her to find me. "I'm sorry," I said finally. I don't know your father." "No," she said. But he knew about Grace. The way she said Grace's name, my wife's name from a stranger's mouth, made the hair on my arms stand up under my coat. "How?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her deciding something. Deciding whether she had enough to give me what she came here to give. Whether I looked like someone who could survive receiving it. "Could we sit down?" she said quietly. "Please. There's a bench I think near the overlook. I saw it when I came in. I think you should probably be sitting down when I tell you this." I almost said no. I almost told her that whatever her father had asked her to do, it had nothing to do with me, and this was Grace's time, and she needed to leave. I had the words right there ready to go. Old anger has a way of being very articulate, but something in her voice stopped me. She was not performing grief. She was not making a scene. She was just a person who had come a long way to do something terrifying, and she was asking for 2 minutes and a bench. I said, "Okay." We walked to the bench overlooking the bay without speaking. She sat on one end, and I sat on the other, and we were far enough apart that a third person could have fit between us, which felt appropriate. The water was silver in the early light. A few birds were already moving. The world was waking up, and I was sitting on a bench with a stranger, and everything felt very, very strange. "My father's name was Thomas," she said. "Thomas Bennett. He lived in Richmond. He was a retired school teacher. He coached youth baseball for about 15 years. He had 3 grandchildren and a fishing boat he spent half his retirement trying to fix." She paused. "He also had severe heart failure. He spent 16 months on the transplant waiting list." She stopped. I heard the gardenias rustle in my hand. I looked down at them. Then I looked back at her face. "On the night Grace died," Rachel said, her voice going very quiet, "my father received her heart." The bench felt like it dropped 6 inches beneath me. I know that is not physically possible, but that is what it felt like the ground had simply decided to let go for just a second. "What?" I whispered. "The hospital never." "I know. They can't legally. They can't tell you who receives, but my father found out eventually. He had a friend who worked in records, and he shouldn't have done that. I know, and he knew it was wrong, but he needed to know whose family he was carrying around inside his chest. He needed to know who to be grateful to." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard and got it back under control. He found Grace's name, and yours, and he spent the next 2 years trying to figure out how to contact you. I was holding the gardenias so tightly that my knuckles were white. I did not know I was doing that until I looked down and saw them crushed slightly at the stems. You said he told you before he died, I said. When did? 3 weeks ago, she said. His kidneys were failing. The immunosuppressant medication, the stuff that kept his body from rejecting the transplant. It did a lot of damage over time. He knew it was coming. He had about 2 weeks of clarity at the end, and he used most of it trying to finish something he'd been working on. What kind of something? She reached into the bag that was sitting at her feet. I hadn't even noticed she'd brought a bag, and she pulled out a wooden box. Small, about the size of a shoebox, worn smooth at the corners, like it had been handled many times. She set it on this bench between us. Letters, she said. He tried to write to you, to your family. He started probably 30 different letters over 2 years. She touched the lid of the box. None of them are finished. I stared at the box. He would write 3 pages, she continued, and then decide he had said the wrong thing, or too much, or not enough. He was afraid that receiving Grace's heart would seem he didn't want you to think he was glad she died. He didn't want to sound like he was celebrating. But he also didn't want you to think her gift meant nothing. Every time he tried to write the letter, it came out wrong, and he couldn't fix it, and so he'd fold it up and put it in the box and try again later. She pressed her hand flat on the lid. He left 31 letters in here, none of them finished. I think I stopped breathing for a moment. I genuinely am not sure. What did he? My voice came out wrecked. I cleared my throat and tried again. What did he say? In his last, when he sent you here, what did he tell you to say to me? Rachel looked at the bay for a moment before she answered. I could see her composing herself the way you do when you have a speech prepared and the emotion keeps trying to ambush it. He said, find Grace's husband. Don't let my fear leave him believing her gift was forgotten. She turned back to me. Her eyes were very clear now. The crying done for the moment, replaced by something that looked like steadiness she'd had to work hard to build. That's what he said. Almost exactly like that. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget any part of it. I looked at the wooden box. 31 unfinished letters from a man I had never met. A man who had been alive for 32 extra months because of the worst day of my life. A man who woke up from surgery with my wife's heart beating in his chest and spent 2 years trying to find the right words and never could. I understood that, actually. I understood that more than almost anything I had ever heard. He's been, you said, 32 months, I said. Yes. And Grace's heart. I had to start again. Her heart was still strong, Rachel said, and her voice was very gentle. When he died, the doctors said the heart itself was perfectly healthy. It wasn't the transplant that took him. It was the medication damaged the kidneys. But Grace's heart. She paused and looked at me steadily. Grace's heart was beating strong until the very end. I put the gardenias down on the bench beside me. I pressed both my hands over my face, and I sat there for a very long time. She didn't say anything. She didn't move to touch my arm, or offer me some hollow comfort, or tell me it was going to be okay. She just sat on the other end of the bench, and let me be wherever I was, and that I did not know it then, but that was the first thing that made me understand that Rachel Bennett was different from most people. Most people are terrified of someone else's grief. They want to fix it or mute it or redirect it into something more comfortable. Rachel just sat with mine. When I finally took my hands down, the sun had moved. Not much, but some. What happened to the letters? I asked. The ones in the box. Can I read them? No, she said. And then quickly, before I could react, not yet. I want to. My dad spent 2 years trying to get the words right, and he never could. I think part of the reason he couldn't was because he was trying to do it alone, trying to speak for himself and for me and for my whole family, and it was too much. So I want to... She took a breath. I want to take his words and combine them with mine, give you the whole truth, not fragments from a dying man, who was scared of saying the wrong thing. I looked at her. "How long are you in Annapolis?" I asked. "I took 10 days away from teaching," she said. "I drove up yesterday. I'm staying at a motel on the Bay Road." "And you want to rewrite the letter?" "I want to give you the truth," she said simply. "Not a draft." I sat with that for the moment. A complete stranger asking me to wait. To trust her with something that already felt like the most fragile thing I had encountered since the day Grace died. She didn't know me. I didn't know her. And her father had lived on my wife's heart for 2 years and 8 months, and I was only finding out right now sitting on a bench at 6 in the morning with crushed gardenias on the wood beside me. "Okay," I said. "I'll wait." It was not a logical response. I can say that with complete confidence in hindsight. But there was something about the certainty in her voice, not arrogance, not performance. Just the quiet resolve of someone who had made a promise and intended to keep it no matter what it cost her, that made the logical response feel like the wrong one. I picked up the gardenias and stood up. "I need to go put these on her grave," I said. You can come if you want, or not. Either way." Rachel stood up and picked up her bag and the wooden box, and she walked with me back through the rows of headstones to Grace's grave. She stood a few steps back while I cleaned the granite and laid the flowers. I talked to Grace the way I always do, quietly, without caring how I sounded. I told her about the week. I told her about a particularly difficult caller I'd had on the radio Thursday night, a man who had lost his brother and didn't know what to do with the silence in his house. I told her I missed her, then, because it felt dishonest to omit it. I told her that her heart had been with a man named Thomas for almost 3 years, and that his daughter had come to find me, and that I did not know yet what any of it meant. Rachel didn't say anything while I talked. But when I stood up and turned around, she was crying again. Not loudly, just a few quiet tears that she made no attempt to wipe away. "Sorry," she said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's all right," I said, and I realized saying it that I meant it. Her being there, her crying at my wife's grave, this stranger with her dead father's unfinished letters in a wooden box, did not feel like an intrusion anymore. I could not fully explain that. I still cannot 2 years later, when I try to trace back all the moments that led to where we are now. I just know that the anger I'd walked in with had gone somewhere I couldn't locate, replaced by something I hadn't felt since before Grace died. I hadn't felt less alone. I walked out of Chesapeake Memorial Cemetery that morning, and I got in my car, and I sat there for a full 5 minutes before I started the engine. There was a woman staying at a motel on the Bay Road who was going to spend the next 10 days putting together the truth about the 32 months my wife's heart spent inside another person. She had driven hours to find me because a dying man asked her to. She had knelt in the wet grass before I arrived and cried over the name of a woman she never knew. Thomas Bennett had prayed for us, Rachel had said. Every night. He had prayed for the family he was too frightened to contact. I drove home. I did not feel completely alone. For the first time in 2 years, I drove home from Grace's grave, and I did not feel completely alone, and I did not know whether to be grateful for that or terrified of it. So I felt both. I sat in my car in front of my building, and I felt both at the exact same time and outside my windshield. The Chesapeake Bay was going silver and gold as the morning opened up, and somewhere across town in a motel room, a woman named Rachel Bennett was sitting with a wooden box full of her dead father's unfinished letters, deciding where to begin. I went upstairs. Grace's coat was still hanging by the door. Her coffee mug was still in the kitchen cabinet. Her closet had not been opened since the day we came home from the funeral. I stood in the middle of the apartment, and I looked at all of it. All the things I had not been able to touch. All the things I had been protecting as though disturbing them would be the final proof that she was really gone, as though if I just left everything exactly as she had left it, time might eventually reverse itself, and she might come back and put her hands in her coat pockets and reach for that mug and ask me how my night had been. Then I went to the kitchen, and I made coffee, and I sat down at the table, and I thought about a man named Thomas in Richmond, and how he had woken up from surgery, hearing a heartbeat for the first time in years, and how he had prayed for us every night for 32 months, and how he had died 3 weeks ago with a strong heart that was not his. And I thought Grace would have wanted to know about that. She would have wanted to know that the part of her she couldn't take with her had found its way to someone who treated it like the gift it was. I thought about that for a long time. Then I poured the coffee and went to the window, and I watched the morning happen to the bay, and I let myself believe just for a few minutes carefully, the way you believe in something fragile, that maybe finding out was supposed to happen exactly like this. At Grace's grave before sunrise on an ordinary Sunday, 2 years and some months after the worst day of my life, with gardenias in my hand and a stranger's tears in the grass. He did not expect her to show up at the radio station. That was the thing. Daniel kept coming back to later, when he tried to reconstruct the sequence of events that changed everything. He had left the cemetery that Sunday morning with no plan, no arrangement, no specific time or place agreed upon. Rachel had said she needed time to put the letter together. He had said he would wait. That was the entirety of their agreement. Two strangers on a bench, one promise made without a handshake, and then they had gone their separate ways into the same city, and Daniel had spent the rest of Sunday in a state he could only describe as suspended. Not sad, not relieved, not anything. He had a clean word for. Just suspended. Like a man who has just been told that the ground he has been standing on for 2 years is not in fact solid, and now he is waiting to find out what happens next. I went to work Monday night the same way he always did. He drove to the station at 11:30, made a cup of terrible break room coffee, put on his headphones, and sat down behind the microphone at midnight. His program ran from midnight to 5 in the morning. He had hosted it for 6 years, 3 of them with Grace, who used to stay up to listen from their bedroom and text him complaints about his song choices. The program had no official name, just Daniel After Midnight in the station schedule, and it was the kind of show that existed in the spaces where other programming couldn't reach the hospital. Waiting rooms, the long-haul truck cabs somewhere on Route 50, the kitchen tables where people sat alone at 3 in the morning, because sleep had decided not to come, and the silence was too loud without it. Daniel was good at the show because he did not pretend. He did not tell people their pain was temporary, or that everything happened for a reason, or any of the other things that sounded like comfort, but felt to anyone actually inside grief, like a door slammed in the face. He just talked. He played music. He answered calls from people he would never meet in person, and he listened to them the way he wished someone had listened to him in those first weeks after Grace, when everyone around him was so frightened of his grief that they kept trying to redirect it into something more manageable. Monday night's show was unremarkable on the surface. 2 nurses coming off a double shift. A retired school teacher who called every other week. A young man somewhere in Virginia who couldn't explain why he was awake, just that he was, and that hearing another human voice made the darkness feel less total. Daniel talked them all through it with the same steady, unhurried attention he had always given his callers. He did not mention Sunday morning. He did not say the words, Grace or Hart, or Thomas, or Rachel. He kept those things in the part of himself that the microphone didn't reach. But the whole time, underneath every conversation, underneath every song he queued up, and every caller he listened to, there was a low, persistent hum of something he couldn't turn off, like a frequency just outside normal hearing that you only notice in the quiet. He finished the show at 5. Drove home, was asleep by 6:15. He woke up at 9:45 to his phone buzzing on the nightstand. Unknown number, Richmond area code. He stared at it until it stopped. Then he sat up on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands to his face and breathed. She had his number. Of course she had his number. She had tracked him down to a specific grave in a specific cemetery at a specific hour. A phone number was not going to stop her if she wanted to call. He didn't call back. He told himself that was because he needed coffee first. He made the coffee. He drank half of it standing at the kitchen window looking at the bay. Then he called back. It rang twice. I wasn't sure you'd call, Rachel said. I wasn't sure either, Daniel said. How'd you sleep? See, badly. A beat. You. Same. A short silence that did not feel uncomfortable exactly. More like 2 people standing at opposite ends of a rope, each testing whether it would hold. I'm working on it, she said. The letter. I went through all 31 of his drafts last night. Some of them—" Her voice caught slightly, and she steadied it. "Some of them are going to undo me a little, but I'm working on it." "Okay," Daniel said. "I was wondering." Another brief pause. "I want to understand Grace, not from her obituary. I read her obituary when my dad found her name. I want to know who she actually was, the person whose heart my father carried. Would you be willing to— I mean, I know it's a lot to ask." Daniel looked at Grace's coat hanging by the door. He said, "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Rachel said. And then quickly, "I know that's too much. Start anywhere." He started with the gardenias. He told her about the first time he bought them, the little flower shop near the apartment they'd had before the house. How Grace had pressed her nose into the petals and said they smelled like the beginning of every good thing. He told it without planning to tell it, the way you tell a story that has been sitting behind your teeth for so long, it comes out the moment someone leaves enough space for it. Rachel listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "She sounds like someone who paid attention." "She paid more attention than anyone I've ever known," Daniel said. "My father was like that too," Rachel said quietly. "He noticed things. He'd walk into my classroom on a Tuesday afternoon to drop off something I forgot, and he'd go home and say, 'That boy in the back row, the one by the window, he looked like he hadn't eaten.' And he'd be right, every time." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like a good man," he said. "I was a very frightened one at the end," Rachel said. "That's why he never finished the letters. Not because he didn't care. Because he cared too much, and he was terrified of what caring too much might look like to you." Daniel absorbed that. "I understand that," he said. "More than she probably would have, honestly. Grace always said I overthought every apology until it became its own separate problem." Rachel laughed. It was a small, surprised sound, like she hadn't expected it to arrive. "My dad said that about himself too." "Then they would have had a lot to talk about," Daniel said. And then he stopped because the sentence had come out of him so naturally that it took him a moment to catch what he'd said. Two dead people. Having a conversation he was imagining for them. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. Rachel was quiet for a second too. Then she said, "Yeah, I think they would have." That was Monday. Tuesday morning. Daniel arrived at the station at 11:30 to pick up something he'd left in his desk drawer, and found Rachel Bennett standing outside the station's front door with 2 cups of coffee from the place 2 blocks over, the good place, not the gas station across the street that the overnight crew usually fell back on out of desperation. She was wearing a different jacket today, green this time, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked like she had slept marginally better than she had Monday. "I figured you'd be here this morning," she said when she saw him. "The station website says you do a prep session Tuesday and Thursday mornings." "You looked up the station website." "I'm a teacher. Research is a reflex." I took the coffee because refusing it seemed like the kind of thing that would require more energy than he currently had. "How did you know which station?" "You mentioned it Sunday. I Googled your name plus Annapolis radio." "You could have called." "I was going to," she said. "And then I thought, what if he says don't come? And I decided I'd rather show up and get turned away in person than get turned away over the phone." Daniel looked at her over his coffee cup. "That is either very brave or slightly concerning." "Probably both," she said. "My father used to say the most important things he ever did in his life were also the ones that made him feel the most stupid while he was doing them." "That sounds about right," Daniel said. And he held the door open. She sat behind the studio glass while he did his prep work. He hadn't intended to show her the... He had intended to sit her down in the break room, go over whatever she wanted to ask, send her on her way with a reasonable and friendly goodbye. But she asked what the room looked like through the glass, and he showed her. And then she asked if she could just sit there while he worked, because she found it easier to write in spaces where someone else was already working. And before he had fully decided whether that was a reasonable request, she was already in the chair with her notebook open on her lap. He watched her from the other side of the glass while he organized his segment notes. She was reading through Thomas's drafts, the unfinished letters, making marks in her own notebook in the margins. Every so often her pen would stop moving, and she would sit very still for a moment, and he could tell even through the glass that whatever she was reading had caught her somewhere soft, and she needed a second to absorb it before she could continue. He found himself wondering what Thomas had written. What a man says in 31 attempts when the thing he needs to say is, "I am alive because you lost the person you loved most, and I don't know how to be grateful for that without making you hate me." He thought he understood the silence. He thought he might have written the same letters, tried the same words, put them in a box. On Wednesday, she showed up again. This time she brought pastries from the bakery on West Street, the one Grace used to go to every Saturday morning. Daniel did not ask how she knew about that bakery. He suspected she had been walking Grace's city, the same way an anthropologist walks an ancient site, slowly, carefully collecting evidence of a life. He did not find it intrusive. He found it the opposite of intrusive, though he did not have a word for the opposite of intrusive. "Can I ask you something?" she said, sitting across from him with a coffee and a croissant. She wasn't really eating. "Go ahead." "The people who call your show, do you ever want to tell them about your own loss, while they're telling you theirs?" He thought about that. "Sometimes," he said. "Not because I want to make it about me. More because sometimes I think it would help them to know I'm not sitting outside their grief looking in. That I'm in the same room, I've just been here longer." "Why don't you?" "Because the show isn't for me," he said. "It's for them." Rachel looked at him steadily. "Do you have anywhere that's for you?" He thought about Grace's grave. The 20-minute drive. The gardenias. The 1 hour every week when he let himself be a husband instead of a widower. "I thought I did," he said. "I'm less sure now." She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them that neither of them commented on, because naming it felt premature, and possibly dangerous, the way certain things feel when they are very new, and you are afraid that putting words to them will make them brittle. "Tell me about Thomas's last Christmas," Daniel said. Rachel blinked. The subject change was abrupt, and she knew it, and he knew it, and they both let it land without discussion. "It was 14 months ago," she said. "He already knew the kidneys were struggling. But he made my brother drive down from Baltimore with the kids, and he cooked the entire dinner himself. 7 people, 3 courses, 2 pies. My nephew knocked over a full pitcher of gravy, and my dad just laughed. He laughed until he was crying, and then he was crying because he was laughing, and none of us could tell which was which." She paused. "He said afterward that it was the best Christmas of his life. He had not had a Christmas like that in years before the transplant. He had been too sick, too tired, just—" She pressed her lips together. He had missed so many things, and he was so grateful for that one loud, stupid, gravy-covered Christmas. Daniel set down his coffee. "Grace would have loved that story," he said. "I know," Rachel said. "I think that's why I told it." On Thursday, Daniel took her to the waterfront. He had not intended it to be a tour. It started as a walk to get coffee from a different place, because the Tuesday bakery was closed for a private event. And somehow the walk extended the way walks in that part of Annapolis tend to do when the weather is cooperating and you are not in a particular hurry to get back to anything. He pointed out the hospital where Grace had worked. He did not intend to stop there, but they stopped anyway, both of them standing on the sidewalk outside the entrance, looking at the building without saying anything for almost a full minute. "She came through that door for 12 years, Daniel said. "He came through a hospital door once," Rachel said, "and walked out a different person." He looked at her. "Not different bad," she said quickly. "Just different, more careful. Like he understood something about what it meant to still be here that he hadn't before." "Grace was like that already," Daniel said. "She didn't need to almost die to understand it. She was just built that way. She woke up every morning like the day was something she was grateful to have been handed." He paused. "I used to think that was a personality trait. Now I think it might have been a choice she made and never talked about." Rachel said nothing for a moment. Then, "My dad made it a choice after. It was obvious it was a choice because you could see him making it. Every morning. Like he was reminding himself." She shook her head slightly. "I used to find that almost embarrassing how intentional he was about being happy. Now I'd give anything to have it back." They walked to the small cafe on Maryland Avenue after that. Daniel had not told her they were going there specifically. He had said, "I know a place," And it wasn't until they were inside, and he was looking at the corner table by the window, that he felt the floor shift underneath him, the way it had on the bench at the cemetery. He had proposed to Grace at that table. Valentine's Day, 8 years ago, with a ring he had been carrying around for 3 weeks, because every time he planned to do it, he either lost his nerve or the moment hadn't felt right. And finally, Grace had looked across a table exactly like that one and said, "Daniel, whatever you're thinking about, just say it." And so he had. He said, "I need to tell you something about this place." Rachel looked around, then back at him. "Okay, I propose to Grace here." She went very still. "We can go somewhere else," he said immediately. "No," she said. "No, I want to sit here. Is that strange? I want to sit at the table where you asked her to marry you." She looked at him steadily. "I want to understand every part of what my father was given, even the parts that make me feel like I don't have the right to be in the room." They sat at the corner table by the window. Daniel ordered what he always ordered there, because some habits were load-bearing and he could not afford to dismantle them. Rachel ordered coffee and then didn't drink it. She sat with her hands around the cup and she said, "Can I tell you something my father told me about the night of the surgery?" "Yes," Daniel said. He said the last thing he remembered before the anesthesia was being scared. Not of dying. He'd been scared of dying for a year and a half. He was used to that. He was scared that the heart wouldn't work, that his body would reject it, that he was going to be handed this impossible gift and his own biology was going to refuse it. She looked down at her coffee cup. He said when he woke up and really heard it, felt it, the first thing he did was cry. And the nurse asked him if he was in pain, and he said no. Someone loved someone enough to say yes. And now I get to carry that. Daniel could not speak for a moment. "He never told anyone else that story," Rachel said. "Just me once, about 6 months after the surgery. He made me promise not to tell people because he said it would sound dramatic." "It doesn't sound dramatic," Daniel said. "It sounds exactly right." She nodded, and they sat there in the corner booth of the cafe, where Daniel had once asked a question that changed his life, and they were quiet together, which was becoming a thing. They did. Sat in silence without it being awkward, which itself felt significant in a way Daniel could not fully articulate. Friday she came to the station again, and this time she had the first 3 pages of the letter. She didn't give them to him. She held the notebook against her chest and said, "I'm not ready yet, but I wanted you to know it's coming." "Okay," he said. "Are you okay?" she asked. He stopped, reconsidered. "I don't know what I am. I know that I'm not sorry you came. Is that enough for now?" She considered that. "Yeah," she said. "For now, yeah." Saturday, he took her to the antique bookshop on Main Street that Grace had loved, where Grace had spent entire weekend afternoons, moving slowly through the aisles, pulling out books by their spines, and reading the first and last pages, and putting them back, and sometimes buying 3 things at once, and sometimes buying nothing. He told Rachel about the first and last pages, how Grace believed the first and last pages of a book were the truest things about it, that if you read both, you could decide whether the middle was worth your time. Rachel laughed, a real laugh, and said, "My dad did the same thing with movies. He'd watch the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes on a streaming service trial and then decide if he wanted to actually rent it." "They would have driven each other crazy," Daniel said. "Or gotten along perfectly," Rachel said. "One of those," he agreed. They were standing between 2 rows of shelves with their shoulders not quite touching, and Daniel was suddenly acutely aware of the proximity in a way he had not been aware of anything physical since Grace died. He took a small step sideways under the pretense of reaching for a book. Rachel did not appear to notice, or if she did, she had the grace not to mention it. That evening, back at the waterfront, walking in the direction of the harbor, where the last of the day's boats were coming in, Rachel reached out and took his hand. It happened without announcement. She was talking about Thomas's fishing boat, the one he had spent so many of his borrowed months trying to repair in mid-sentence. Her hand found his hand, and she held on the way. You hold on when you are walking somewhere uneven and need the balance. He did not pull away. For about 30 seconds they walked like that, and the world continued at its normal pace around them. Boats and birds, and the distant sound of someone on a dock laughing. And then Rachel stopped walking, and pulled her hand back, and pressed it against her own chest, instead, like she was holding something in. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't mean to." "You don't have to apologize," Daniel said. "I think I do." Her voice was tight. "I came here to fulfill my father's dying wish. I came to give you something he couldn't give you himself. I didn't come to—" She stopped. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I," Daniel said. "I think that might be okay." "What if it's not?" she said. "What if what I'm feeling right now is just grief? What if I'm just reaching for someone because my dad died 3 weeks ago, and you're the only person who understands any part of what the last 2 years of his life meant? And this isn't real, it's just pain looking for a handhold." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "That might be true," he said. "And if it is, we'll figure that out. But I've been in a lot of pain for 2 years, and I have never once wanted to hold someone's hand because of it. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the world to stop making noise. I didn't want—" He paused. "This. Whatever this is. I haven't wanted this." Rachel looked at him. "Until now," she said. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't look away either. She looked away first, down at the water, and she said very quietly, "My father would have liked you." "Grace would have liked you," Daniel said. "She would have liked that you came." And that was Friday evening of the first week, and they walked back to where Daniel had parked his car, without touching. Carefully, deliberately, not touching the way you are. Deliberate when you have recognized that something is dangerous, and you are not sure yet whether dangerous means wrong. Saturday evening. Daniel made dinner at his apartment for the first time in 2 years. Not a real dinner pasta and sauce from a jar and garlic bread that was slightly burned on one side, but food prepared in his own kitchen and set on his own table with 2 plates and 2 forks instead of 1. Rachel sat at the table and watched him cook and talked about her students' a 3rd grade class back in Richmond that she was already missing even after only a week away, and he talked about his Tuesday prep sessions and the calls he was getting lately about complicated grief, people who had lost someone and then found themselves unexpectedly connected to another person through that loss and didn't know what language to use for what they were feeling. Rachel looked at him across the table. "You're talking about us," she said. "I'm talking about my callers," he said. "Daniel." "I might be a little bit talking about us," he admitted. She almost smiled. He noticed she almost smiled. He filed that away. After dinner she helped him clean up, which meant she washed and he dried, and they stood at the sink together and were briefly domestically close in a way that felt both very ordinary and entirely unreasonable, given that they had known each other for less than a week. When he reached past her to put a pan back on the counter, she went very still for a second, like a person who is trying very hard to be calm about something that is making it difficult to be calm. He put the pan down. He turned to face her. She was already looking at him. "I can't do this today," she said. Not angry, not pushing him away, just honest. "I need more time. I need the letter to be done first. I need you to have. I need to give you what I came here to give you before anything else happens. Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said. "I'm going to go back to the motel," she said. "Okay." Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said. "I'm glad you came to dinner." She picked up her bag and her jacket and the wooden box which she had brought with her and which had sat on the kitchen counter all evening. And at the door she turned and said, "Daniel, whatever this becomes, it's real. I want you to know that. Whatever happens with the letter, with your mother-in-law, with all of it, what I feel when I'm with you is real." He stood in his own doorway and watched her go. Grace's coat was still hanging on the hook to his right. He reached up and touched the sleeve of it. Just the sleeve. Just his fingertips against the fabric. "I know you'd tell me it's okay," he said quietly to no one in particular. "I know you'd say that, but I need to figure it out for myself." He stood there for a while, then he closed the door. Sunday morning, he brought gardenias to the cemetery the same as always. He cleaned the headstone. He talked to Grace. He told her about the week about Rachel and the cafe and the bookshop and the walk by the harbor and the dinner and the wooden box of unfinished letters sitting on a kitchen counter that had not seen a dinner guest in 2 years. He told Grace that he did not know what any of it meant yet. He told her that he was trying very hard not to do anything stupid. He told her that her heart had been strong until the very end. He said that last part to the granite, and then he put his hand flat against it, the same way Rachel had done a week ago when he had found her here in the early morning, both of them on the same ground. Now the grief and the gratitude tangled together in a way neither of them could separate. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the tangling was not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be lived inside of. And maybe that was what Grace had been trying to tell him all along, with the gardenias, with the first and last pages of books, with the way she woke up every morning like the day was a gift she intended to use. Monday morning Daniel's phone rang at 9. He answered on the second ring. "I need to tell you something," Rachel said. Her voice was different, tighter, not frightened exactly, but braced. "Tell me," he said. "I think we need to tell your mother-in-law," she said. "About my father. About all of it. I think she deserves to know before the letter is finished. And I think you should take me to meet her." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Evelyn. Grace's mother. 71 years old. Sharp as a surgical instrument, with the kind of grief that had calcified over 2 years into something structural, something load-bearing. Evelyn, who kept a photo of Grace on every surface in her house. Evelyn, who called Daniel every Sunday evening to hear about the cemetery visit. Evelyn, who had told Daniel at the funeral quietly and without drama that she did not know how to survive this, and Daniel had said, "Neither do I," and they had stood there together in the truth of it. "She won't," he started. "I know," Rachel said. "I know she won't like it. I'm not asking her to like it. I'm asking for the chance to look her in the face and tell her what my father said, what he prayed, what he carried." Daniel pressed his hand over his eyes. He knew Evelyn. He knew exactly how this could go. He also knew on some deep and unavoidable level that Rachel was right. That Evelyn deserved to know. That letting her find out any other way later accidentally from someone else would be infinitely worse. "I'll set it up," he said. "Okay," Rachel said. "She's going to be upset," he said. "I know. She might say things that are, she's not a cruel person, but she's in pain, and pain makes people say things that feel cruel." "I know," Rachel said again. "Daniel, my father carried the weight of this for 2 years and never found a way to put it down. I can sit across from one grieving mother." He exhaled. He decided something then, though he did not say it out loud. He decided not to call Evelyn first. He told himself it was because calling ahead would give her the chance to say no, and if she said no over the phone, she would have committed to a refusal that would be harder to walk back. He told himself he was protecting the conversation. He told himself it was the right call. He was wrong, and part of him knew it even as he made the decision. But he made it anyway. He called Rachel back and said, "Tomorrow morning, I'll pick you up at the motel at 9. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said. He was right about that. He was absolutely unambiguously right about that. They arrived at Evelyn's house the next morning in Daniel's car, and he knocked on the door without calling ahead. And when Evelyn answered and saw him, and then saw the woman standing beside him, the expression on her face passed through welcome and landed somewhere between confusion and the very beginning of a kind of horror that had nothing to do with dislike and everything to do with recognition. Evelyn recognized that something enormous was about to happen to her. You could see it happen in her face, the way you can sometimes see weather changing in a clear sky before you feel it. "Who is this?" Evelyn said, very calmly. The calm of someone with tremendous self-control, who is already using all of it. "Her name is Rachel Bennett," Daniel said. "I should have called first. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I should have called. But I need you to let us in, because there's something she needs to tell you that you deserve to hear." Evelyn looked at Rachel. Rachel met her eyes. "Please," Rachel said. Just that word. Evelyn stepped back and let them in. The conversation that followed lasted 45 minutes, and it was one of the hardest 45 minutes of Daniel's life, and he had had some very hard minutes. Rachel explained everything. Thomas the transplant, the 16 months on the waiting list, the 32 months that followed the unfinished letters, the dying wish, the wooden box. She explained it clearly, and without embellishment, and without flinching, when Evelyn's face hardened, which it did halfway through. When Rachel said the words her father had received Grace's heart, Evelyn went completely still. Then she said, "And you are telling me this now?" "Yes," Rachel said. 2 years later. My father tried for 2 years to find the right way to... He lived, Evelyn said. Her voice was very precise. Surgical, the way Daniel had thought about her grief being surgical. He lived because my daughter died. He lived, and then he died of something else, and now you are here. Yes, Rachel said. And you want what? Evelyn said. What is it that you want from us? I want to give Daniel the complete truth, Rachel said. I want to make sure he knows that the gift Grace gave, that it wasn't wasted. That my daughter didn't give a gift, Evelyn said. Her voice cracked then, just once, just at the corner of the word gift, and she pressed it back into place. My daughter died. She was 39 years old, and she died in a parking lot, and none of us got to say goodbye to her. And you are sitting in my living room telling me a story about your father's Christmas dinner and his fishing boat, and I don't... She stopped. She pressed her hand to her mouth for a moment. I don't know what you want me to do with that. I don't want you to do anything with it, Rachel said quietly. I just needed you to know. Evelyn looked at Daniel. And this was the moment that Daniel would replay for weeks afterward, the moment he should have handled differently. Because Evelyn looked at him with an expression that was not anger. It was something older and more complicated than anger, and she said, You brought her here without telling me. Yes, Daniel said. Because you thought I would say no. Yes. And are you... She stopped, looked at Rachel, looked back at Daniel. And what he saw in her face then was something he had not expected. Not just grief, not just shock, but a specific pointed pain that told him she was seeing something he hadn't fully admitted to himself yet. Are you building something here with this woman? Is that what this is? You've found a story to tell yourself so that moving on feels like honoring Grace. The room went very quiet. Rachel got to her feet. Mrs. Calloway, she said. Evelyn's last name, Grace's mother's maiden name, which she had kept. I am not here to take anything from you. I am not here to make grief into a love story. I came because my father asked me to, and I will leave the same way I arrived without causing you any more pain than I already have. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe my father anything. But he prayed for your daughter every single night of the 32 months he was alive because of her, and I could not let that be unknown. She picked up her bag, the wooden box. I'll wait in the car. She walked out. The front door closed. Evelyn and Daniel sat in the silence she left behind. Evelyn said, I want you to hear me. I am not a cruel woman. I know that, Daniel said. But I need you to understand something. She looked at him with eyes that had been dry the whole conversation, and were still dry because Evelyn's grief did not perform. I have been attending that remembrance ceremony at the hospital for 2 years. I have read Grace's name into a microphone with my hands shaking every single time. And I am telling you now that I need you to think very carefully about what you are inviting into our lives, both of our lives. I hear you, Daniel said, and I need you to tell that woman, Evelyn said, that she is not to attend the ceremony. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. Evelyn. Not this year, Evelyn said. Not until I understand what this is. Not until I know whether this is about Grace or about you. He drove to the car. Rachel was sitting in the passenger seat with the wooden box on her lap and her hands folded on top of it. She looked straight ahead through the windshield. She doesn't want you at the ceremony, he said. I heard, Rachel said. I'm sorry, he said. I should have called first. I should have given her the choice, and I didn't, because I was afraid of the answer, and that was wrong. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, She's not wrong about you, you know. What do you mean? She sees something in you that you're not ready to name yet, Rachel said. She thinks you're using this me, my father, all of it as a doorway out of your grief, and I think she's partially right. He gripped the steering wheel. "And the other part," he said. Rachel looked at him. "The other part," she said slowly, "is that sometimes the doorway is real. Sometimes the way out is also the way toward something, and those two things can be true at the same time." He drove her back to the motel. He sat in the parking lot for a long time after she went inside. I thought about what Evelyn had said. He thought about what Rachel had said. He thought about Grace's coat on the hook by the door, and her coffee mug in the cabinet, and the closet that had not been opened since the funeral. He thought about the wooden box and the 31 unfinished letters from a man who had carried his wife's heartbeat for nearly 3 years. I thought I made a mistake today. I forced 2 women into the same room because I was afraid of what would happen if I let either of them make their own choice. I told myself it was honesty. It was control. I controlled the situation, and I hurt them both. He drove home. He went to Grace's closet. He put his hand on the door. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to bed because some doors you can only open when you are ready, and being ready is not the same as being brave enough. Sometimes you have to get braver first. And he was not there yet. But he was closer than he had been that morning. He was getting there. Rachel left Annapolis the morning after the Evelyn disaster. She did not slam doors or make declarations. She packed her bag, checked out of the motel, put the wooden box in the back seat of her car, and called Daniel from the parking lot to say she was going home. Her voice was steady. Deliberately, carefully steady. The kind of steady that takes enormous effort to maintain. And Daniel recognized it because he had been maintaining the same kind of steady for 2 years. "You don't have to go," he said. "My 10 days are almost up," she said. "And I think Evelyn needs space before she can receive anything from me. And I think—" She stopped. He could hear her breathing on the other end. "I think I complicated this. I think my dad asked me to do something that was always going to be complicated, and I underestimated how much. And I need to go home and finish the letter where I can think clearly." "Rachel." "I'm not disappearing," she said. "I'm going home. There's a difference." He stood in his kitchen and looked at Grace's coat and thought about all the things he had not said in the last 10 days, all the things that had built up in the space between what he felt and what he was brave enough to put words to. "Call me when you get there," he said. "I will," she said, and she did. 4 hours later, Richmond area code 9:17 in the evening. She had made it home. She was okay. The wooden box was on her kitchen table. She was going to make tea and sit down with Thomas's drafts, and she was going to finish the letter if it took her all night. "What are you going to do?" she asked him. "I'm going to call Evelyn," he said. "And I'm going to tell her the truth about what I did wrong." "Good," Rachel said. And then quietly, "Daniel, I meant what I said before I left. What I feel when I'm with you is real. I need you to hold on to that while everything else is messy." "I'm holding on to it," he said. He called Evelyn that night. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and Evelyn kept early hours and picked up on the third ring, sounding like someone who had not been asleep but had been sitting in the dark, waiting for something. "I know it's late," Daniel said. "I've been awake," she said. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond." A pause. "Go ahead." "I brought Rachel to your door without warning you because I was afraid you would say no if I gave you the choice. That was a decision I made out of my own fear, and I used her father's dying wish as cover for it, and that was wrong. I did not think about what it would feel like to have a stranger appear at your door connected to Grace's death. I thought about what I wanted to happen, and I engineered the situation to make it happen, and I owe you an apology for that." Silence on the line. Long enough that he thought she might have put the phone down. Then Evelyn said, "Go on. I also need to tell you something I haven't been able to say out loud yet." He pressed his hand flat on the kitchen counter the same way he pressed his hand on Grace's headstone, like he needed something solid. "I have been treating grief as proof that I loved Grace. Like the worse I feel, the more it proves she mattered. And Evelyn, she mattered. She mattered more than I have words for. But I think I have been using the pain as a way to keep her close, and I think Grace would have found that exhausting to watch." Another silence. "She would have," Evelyn said, and her voice broke then just slightly on the last word. You know she would have. She would have sat you down and said, Daniel Whitmore, I love you, and you are being an idiot about this. Yeah, he said. His voice came out rough. That's almost exactly what she would have said. Evelyn made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, but somewhere between the two. I've been doing the same thing, she said quietly. Treating the pain as loyalty. Treating anyone who seemed to be moving forward as a traitor. You're allowed to feel that, Daniel said. I know I'm allowed. I'm not sure it's helping. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me about Thomas. Not from the girl. From you. Tell me what you know. So he told her. Sitting on the floor of his kitchen with his back against the cabinets, the way he had sat on the floor the night Grace died, when his legs stopped working and he couldn't find his way to the couch. He told Evelyn about the 31 unfinished letters, about the Christmas with the gravy, about the fishing boat, about the 3 grandchildren, about the classroom visits, about the way Thomas had woken up from surgery and cried because someone loved someone enough to say yes. He told her everything Rachel had told him, and he told it as carefully and as honestly as he could because Evelyn deserved the full picture, even if parts of it hurt her. When he finished, Evelyn was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he prayed for her. Every night, Daniel said. He kept her name. Inside his medication cabinet, Daniel said, when he found out who she was. Evelyn said nothing. Evelyn. I'm here, she said. I need a minute. He gave her the minute. Several of them. I'm not ready, she said finally. I'm not ready to, I don't know what I am ready for. But I'm listening. That's more than I was yesterday. Is that enough for now? Yes, Daniel said. That's enough. He did not sleep well that night. But it was a different kind of not sleeping. Not the hollow grinding insomnia of grief, but the restless not sleeping of something that is trying to change shape inside you and hasn't quite finished yet. 3 days passed. Rachel called every evening. The calls started short updates on the letter questions about Thomas's phrasing, in specific drafts details. She wanted to confirm, and then extended the way calls do when the stated purpose has been handled, and neither person wants to hang up yet. They talked about her students, about his callers, about terrible television. They were each watching separately in their separate apartments across the 2-hour distance. They talked about nothing important and everything important at the same time. And Daniel found himself watching the clock after 10 p.m., aware that he was waiting. That awareness frightened him slightly. He let it. On the 4th day, a Wednesday, he went into Grace's closet. He had been standing at the door of it for 2 years. 2 years of his hand on the handle of opening it an inch, and then closing it again, of treating it like a room that could only be entered with permission. He hadn't figured how to grant himself. He didn't call Rachel first. He didn't call Evelyn. He just stood in front of it in the morning with a cup of coffee, and then he set the cup down and he opened the door. Grace's clothes were still there. Organized the way she had organized everything, by season, by color, within season. The kind of orderly system that had always made Daniel feel like a chaotic contrast. Her winter coat, the good one, the charcoal gray wool one she wore to the hospital on cold mornings, was on the left. Her summer dresses on the right. In the middle, the everyday things. The scrubs she wore to work. The soft sweaters she changed into when she got home. He stood there in this doorway and he breathed. He did not cry immediately. He thought he would, but he didn't. He just stood there and breathed in the faint remnant of her presence, which was mostly just the smell of wool and cedar blocks, and something else that was going very slowly, and he understood with a clarity he had not had before, that the going of it was not a betrayal. It was just time. Time doing what time does, indifferent to permission. He started on the left side and moved to the right. He did not rush. He took each thing out and held it and let himself feel whatever came up. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes the sudden drop of a specific memory. The way grief will ambush you with something precise and sensory and devastating out of nowhere, like a smell or the texture of a fabric. He let it come, and he let it pass, and he kept going. He kept Grace's nursing badge. Her reading glasses, the pair she wore when she curled up in the corner of the couch with a library book and had no intention of being interrupted. The sweater she had worn on their last anniversary, soft blue cashmere, she had found at a consignment shop and been inexplicably proud of. A handwritten note she had left in the inside pocket of a jacket. Just a grocery list, tomatoes and milk, and the specific brand of crackers he liked, but in her handwriting, which he was beginning to forget the precise shape of and which he needed to keep. Everything else he folded carefully and stacked. He called the shelter the following morning. The one that supported women rebuilding after medical crises. Grace had volunteered there twice a month. The woman who answered said they would send someone Friday. Daniel said thank you. He held it together for about 30 seconds after he hung up, and then he sat down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands and let himself grieve the closet properly, which took about 12 minutes, and then he stood up and washed his face and made another cup of coffee. He called Rachel. I opened Grace's closet, he said without preamble. A pause. Today. This morning. How are you? He considered it. I'm okay. I think I'm actually okay. I kept a few things. I'm donating the rest to the shelter. Daniel. Her voice was soft. I couldn't have done it last week, he said. I couldn't have done it before Sunday. Before the cemetery. I need you to know that. I know, she said. I'm not saying it to put something on you, he said quickly. It matters to me that you know what your coming here changed. Not just the Thomas part. All of it. Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had a texture he hadn't heard in it before, something raw and careful at the same time. The letter is almost done, she said. Yeah, I want to read it to you at the grave, she said. Not over the phone, not in an email, at Grace's grave. Will you let me do that? Yes, he said, without hesitation. When? This weekend, she said. If that's okay. Come back, he said. She came back Saturday morning. She drove the 2 hours before sunrise, which he only knew because she texted him at 4:45 from the road on my way. He was already awake. He was always already awake before sunrise on Saturdays, the same way he was always awake before sunrise on Sundays, which was a habit that Grace had started in him years ago, when she would come home from night shifts and he would make coffee, and they would sit together in the dark kitchen, watching the bay go from black to gray to gold. He met her in the cemetery parking lot at 6:15. She was wearing the navy jacket again, the same one from the first morning, which might have been deliberate, or might have been the first thing she grabbed with Rachel. He was beginning to understand. It was often hard to tell the difference between deliberate and instinctive, because she had a way of doing the right thing that looked effortless even when it wasn't. She was carrying the wooden box. He was carrying gardenias. They walked together through the headstones in the early morning dark, their footsteps on the gravel path. The only sound, and neither of them spoke, because the quiet felt right. Felt like it had been built for exactly this, two people carrying things across a sleeping cemetery toward a stone with a name on it. He set the gardenias down. He cleaned the headstone the way he always did, and Rachel stood back the way she had stood back the first morning, giving him the space that was his. And when he stood up, she came forward. She sat on the grass in front of Grace's grave. She opened the wooden box. There are 31 drafts in here, she said. Her voice was steady in a way that told him she had steadied it, deliberately had practiced for this, had done whatever Rachel Bennett did when she needed to show up completely for something. I read every one of them. Some of them he wrote during the first year when everything was still raw, and he was still learning how to live inside a borrowed life. Some of them he wrote in the second year when he was better, when he was going to football games and fixing the boat and teaching me how to make his mother's meatball recipe. All of them say the same thing underneath the different words. All of them say, I don't know how to carry this gratitude without it looking like I'm glad for your loss. And I need you to know I am not glad. I am profoundly, devastatingly not glad. She opened her notebook. The letter she had written was there. Thomas's words woven with hers, two voices made into one, and she began to read. She read about the night of the surgery. Thomas lying on a gurney in a fluorescent-lit hallway so far into heart failure that the doctors had told the family to prepare, and then the call coming through, and the world changing on its axis in a way that Thomas had never fully stopped marveling at. She read about waking up in recovery and hearing his own heartbeat for the first time in years, really hearing it steady and strong, a rhythm that had nothing uncertain in it, and crying in a way that alarmed the nursing staff until he could explain. She read about the first weeks, the fear that his body would reject it, the prayers every night for the family he didn't know yet, the guilt that arrived alongside the gratitude and never fully left. The way he would sometimes put his hand on his own chest in the middle of an ordinary moment, driving to the grocery store, sitting in Rachel's classroom, watching her third graders work on a project, and just feel it. Just stop and feel it and remember. She read about finding Grace's name, the shame of how he found it, the rule he had broken, and his inability to regret it, because knowing gave him something to direct his gratitude toward: a name, a face from the online obituary, a history of a woman who had spent her adult life helping people in their worst moments. He had printed her photo and kept it beside his medication cabinet. Not out of obsession, out of obligation, out of the need to remember that the gift had a face. She read 32 months in the span of about 20 minutes. The graduation, the boat, the Christmas, the grandchildren, the classroom visits and the dinner and the final conscious days when Thomas had made Rachel promise, had pressed her hand between both of his and said, "Find Grace's husband. Don't let my fear leave him," believing her gift was forgotten. And then she reached the part that Thomas had never been able to finish. His final, unfinished paragraph, the one that ended mid-sentence in the last draft, because he had run out of time, run out of energy, run out of the particular courage that the words required. Rachel's voice did not break. She read it straight. "I don't know how to thank you for a life that began with your worst day. I would return this heart immediately if it could bring Grace home. Since I cannot, I can only promise to live in a way that makes her gift mean something." She stopped. The morning was very quiet. A bird somewhere. The distant sound of a car on the road outside the cemetery walls. "That's where he stopped," Rachel said. "Every time. 31 drafts, and he stopped at the same place every time. Because he didn't know how to finish it. He didn't know what came after the promise." She looked up from the notebook. Her eyes were wet now, not spilling over, just filled. "So I finished it." She turned the page. "What came after the promise?" she read, and this was her voice now. Her words were 3 more Christmases than we expected. What came after were mornings he sat at the kitchen table and read the newspaper and complained about the weather. What came after were arguments about which route to take, and who forgot to buy milk, and whether the boat was worth the cost of fixing it. What came after was my brother's baby, the one born 11 months after the surgery, the one my dad held in the hospital while it was still smaller than a football and cried in a way we had never seen before. What came after were his hands in my classroom soil during the spring planting project. What came after were the ordinary things, the forgettable things, the things we stopped noticing because we were used to having them, until suddenly we were used to him being there, and then he was not, and we understood finally what he had understood all along. She closed the notebook. "He understood what you lost," Rachel said. "He understood it every day. He lived inside the debt of it for 32 months, and he never stopped knowing it. And I came here because I could not let you go on not knowing that." Daniel had not moved. I was sitting in the wet grass beside Grace's headstone, and he had not moved for the entire reading, and his face was... He did not know what his face was. He could not feel his face. He could feel everything else. Everything in his chest. All of it. All at once. Every layer of the last 2 years, and the 2 years before that when Grace was alive, and he had not understood how rare ordinary mornings were, but he could not feel his face. "Thank you," he said. His voice came out barely audible. Rachel reached into the wooden box. "There's one more thing," she said. She took out a small object. It was a square of fabric, soft and dark, about the size of a deck of cards, with a small round button sewn into the center. She held it in both hands and looked at him. During his last month, the transplant clinic helped him record the sound of his heartbeat. Grace's heartbeat. He wanted to send it to you. She paused. He was afraid it would be too much, so he didn't. But he kept it, and he gave it to me, and he said that you would know whether you were ready for it when the time came." Daniel stared at the fabric heart in her hands. His mouth went dry. "Is the time now?" Rachel asked softly. "You tell me. I'll put it back if you want me to." He held his hand out. She placed it in his palm. It was small and warm from her hands. He looked at it. The small round button in the center. He pressed it. The sound that came out was quiet, barely above a whisper in the early morning air. A heartbeat. Steady, low, unhurried. The rhythm of something strong and determined, something that had continued without permission or ceremony, long past the moment it might have stopped. Daniel pressed the fabric heart against his own chest. He closed his eyes, and the sound was Grace's heart. Not a metaphor, not a memory, not the thing he had replayed in his mind for 2 years when the apartment was too quiet. The actual recorded sound of the actual beating of the heart that had been Grace's before. It was Thomas's the heart that had been strong until the very end, the heart that had said yes to one more birthday and one more Christmas and one more ordinary Tuesday morning in a borrowed and precious life. He did not make any sound at all. He just sat in the grass and held the fabric heart against his chest and let the sound come through him like water through a wall that has been holding too long. He did not know how long he sat like that. Long enough that the sun had moved. Long enough that the morning birds had gone quiet and started again. Long enough that the dew on the grass had dried at the edges. When he finally opened his eyes, Rachel was still there, sitting across from him with her hands in her lap, completely still. Not watching him, the way people watch someone cry, but just present. Just there, the same as she had been on the bench that first morning. The same as she had been in the break room and the cafe and the bookshop and the kitchen, where the pasta had burned slightly on one side. He became aware then of a sound he had not heard. A footstep on the gravel path coming closer and then stopping. He turned. Evelyn was standing 10 feet away. She was in her good coat, the navy one she wore to church and to the remembrance ceremony, which meant she had dressed for this, which meant she had known she was coming, which meant she had decided something in the last few days that Daniel did not know about. Her face was pale. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at the fabric heart in Daniel's hands. No, she was listening to it. The recording was still playing, still beating. Evelyn took one step forward, then another. Her hands came up slowly, and she pressed them both over her mouth, and for a moment Daniel could not tell if she was about to scream or about to fall, and he started to stand, but she shook her head, a small sharp movement that meant stay, and he stayed. She walked forward until she was close enough, and Daniel held the fabric heart out toward her without saying anything, and Evelyn took it from him and pressed it against her own chest, over her own heart, and she stood there with her eyes closed and her mouth still covered by her other hand. The recording beat on. Rachel had gone completely still. She was watching Evelyn with an expression Daniel had never seen on her face before. Not fear exactly, more like the held breath of someone who is watching something sacred happen and does not want to be the thing that breaks it. Evelyn stood there for a long time. Then she lowered her hand from her mouth. She looked at the fabric heart. Then she looked at Rachel. "How long did he have?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. 32 months, Rachel said. And he prayed for her. Every night. Evelyn nodded once. Small. Private. Like she was confirming something to herself rather than to the room. Then she said, "Your father did not steal my daughter's heart." Rachel did not breathe. "He carried it," Evelyn said. "That's not the same thing." She held the fabric heart out to Rachel. Rachel took it with both hands and held it carefully like something that could break, like something that should not be dropped. Evelyn turned to Daniel. "I came here to speak to you privately," she said. "I did not know Rachel would be here." She paused. "I'm glad she is." Daniel got to his feet. "Evelyn, let me finish." She straightened. She was a small woman who took up a great deal of space when she needed to. "I have been treating that ceremony like a wall. Like if I keep it exactly contained, exactly controlled with exactly the right people in exactly the right place, the grief will stay manageable." And what I realized at 3 o'clock this morning, sitting in the dark in my kitchen, is that I have been trying to manage something that cannot be managed. It can only be lived. Her eyes went to Rachel. Tomorrow, she said, when I say my daughter's name, I want you standing beside me. Rachel looked at her. The fabric heart was still in her hands. Mrs. Calloway, I'm not asking you to grieve with me, Evelyn said. I'm asking you to stand beside me. There's a difference. She looked at Daniel. You understand the difference? I do, he said. Good. She looked at Grace's headstone. She stood there looking at it for a moment, and her face went through something private that neither Daniel nor Rachel intruded upon. Then she looked at Rachel and she said, Tomorrow bring Thomas's letter. The finished one. I want to hear it. She turned and walked back down the path the way she had come. Neither Daniel nor Rachel moved until the sound of her footsteps on the gravel faded. Then Rachel looked at Daniel. Did that just— Yes, he said. She came on her own. Yes. Rachel pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, the same gesture Evelyn had just made, and Daniel thought how grief makes us use the same gestures across generations, across families, across strangers, pressing the hand over the mouth to hold something in that is too large for the available space. I didn't think— Rachel started. Neither did I, Daniel said. She lowered her hand. She looked at the fabric heart in her other hand. She pressed the button again, not all the way, just enough to feel the mechanism under her thumb, and the heartbeat returned quiet and steady in the morning air. She pressed the button again, and it stopped. She's right, Rachel said. He carried it. That's not the same as taking. No, Daniel said. It's not. They stood together at Grace's grave, the wooden box between them on the grass, the gardenias laid flat against the granite, the fabric heart in Rachel's hands, and the morning opened up around them, the way mornings do when you have been in the dark for long enough that you have forgotten how much light is available. Daniel picked up the wooden box. He picked up the 31 unfinished letters tucked inside. He held them for a moment. I want to keep these, he said. They're yours, Rachel said. They always were. He looked at Grace's name on the headstone, the dates, the small engraved gardenia that Evelyn had chosen, and that he had not been able to look at directly for a very long time without his vision going sideways. He looked at it directly now. She would have liked Thomas, he said. My dad would have loved Grace, Rachel said. He nodded. Then he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay, she said. When this is over, when the ceremony is done, and the letter has been read, and Evelyn has what she needs, and Thomas has what he deserves, what are you going to do? Are you going back to Richmond? Rachel looked at him, a full 3 seconds of looking. I have a job in Richmond, she said carefully. I know. I have an apartment in Richmond. I know that too. Is that what you're asking? She said. Whether I have reasons to go back? No, he said. I'm asking whether going back is what you want. She looked at the headstone, at the gardenias, at the wooden box in his hands. Ask me that again in a week, she said. After the ceremony, after everything that needs to be done is done. Ask me then. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They walked out of the cemetery together, the gravel path crunching under their feet, the wooden box under Daniel's arm, the fabric heart in Rachel's hand, and the morning completely opened up, now gold and wide and indifferent to the enormous things that had just happened inside it, the way mornings always are, the way Grace always is not, because the world doesn't care, but because the world has learned that the most sacred things require ordinary light to survive in. The ceremony was tomorrow, and for the first time in 2 years, Daniel was not facing it alone. The night before the ceremony, Daniel did not sleep. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the apartment, which had a different quality of silence now than it had had 2 weeks ago. Not better exactly. Not worse. Different. The closet was empty of Grace's things, and the difference it made to the air in the room was something he had not anticipated, like a held breath finally released, like a pressure he had not known was there until it was gone. He got up at 3 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table and called Rachel. She picked up on the second ring. "You're not sleeping either," he said. "I haven't slept since the cemetery," she said. "I keep running through the letter, wondering if I said the right things, whether your mother-in-law is going to arrive tomorrow and have changed her mind." "She won't," Daniel said. "You sound certain." "I know Evelyn," he said. "When she decides something, she decides it. She has never walked back a decision in her life. It's one of the things that used to make Grace crazy about her, and one of the things Grace was most grateful for." Rachel was quiet for a moment. What was Grace's relationship with her like, really like? He thought about it. Really thought the way you think about something that is complicated and real and not reducible to a summary. "Complicated," he said. They fought about everything small and agreed about everything important. Grace inherited Evelyn's stubbornness, and neither of them would ever admit it. They talked on the phone almost every day, usually about nothing, usually ending with one of them saying something slightly sharp and the other one hanging up with a tone, and then calling back 20 minutes later to apologize. And by apologize, I mean say something completely unrelated, as if the sharpness hadn't happened. He paused. "After Grace died, Evelyn called me every Sunday. She still does. We do the same thing, talk about nothing. Talk about Grace, hang up. It's the most honest relationship I have right now." "That's," Rachel said, "that's really something." "She's really something," Daniel said. "Don't let the eyes fool you. She loved her daughter in a way that broke her when Grace died, and she has been surviving the wreckage ever since. Just like me." They stayed on the phone until 5 in the morning, not always talking. Sometimes one of them would go quiet, and the other would wait comfortable with the silence, in the way you get comfortable with someone's silence when you have sat in enough of it together. At 5, Rachel said she was going to try to sleep for 2 hours, and Daniel said that was a good idea, and neither of them moved to hang up for another full minute. "Daniel," she said finally. "Yeah, thank you for calling. For the first call, I mean. 3 weeks ago. When you called me back from the Richmond number." "I almost didn't," he said. "I know. I'm glad you did." "Me too," he said. "I went back to bed and did not sleep, but lay there listening to the morning build outside the window, the birds first, and then the distant traffic, and then the particular quality of light that comes through curtains when the sun is rising. And he thought about Grace, and about Thomas, and about Evelyn, and about Rachel, and about the ceremony that was going to happen in 16 hours, and he thought whatever comes next, I can face it. I don't know what it is yet, but I can face it." That felt like something new. He was showered and dressed and sitting at the kitchen table with coffee by 7:15. Evelyn called at 7:30. "I want to discuss the order," she said without preamble, because Evelyn never used preamble when the situation called for logistics. "Good morning to you too," Daniel said. "Good morning. The order." "Tell me. I will speak first. I will say what I always say. Grace's name, her dates, her work, the donation. But this year I want to add something. I want to say that Grace's gift was received, that someone carried it with care." A pause. "I don't want to say Thomas's name publicly without Rachel's agreement. I'll ask her." "I already texted her." Daniel stopped. "You have Rachel's number." "I asked you for it last week," Evelyn said. "You asked me for it." He tried to recall. He could not recall. "When?" "Wednesday. You were distracted. You said yes, and then you sent it without remembering. That's fine. We have been corresponding." Daniel set down his coffee cup. "You and Rachel have been corresponding." "We have been texting," Evelyn said with the very slight edge of someone who considers this distinction important. "It is not the same as corresponding. Corresponding implies depth. Texting is logistics. What kind of logistics?" A pause that was approximately half a second longer than it needed to be. "I asked her to send me a photograph of Thomas. She sent 3. I asked her some questions about his medical history that were frankly none of my business, and she answered them anyway, which I appreciated." Another pause. "I also asked her whether she thought her father would have wanted to be acknowledged publicly, or whether he would have preferred privacy." Daniel was very still. What did she say? She said he would have wanted whatever caused the least pain to Grace's family, Evelyn said. She said, and I quote, he spent 2 years trying to make sure his gratitude didn't land as a burden. I don't think he would have wanted his name to be the thing that made the ceremony harder for someone. She said that. A brief silence. I thought that was the right answer. It is the right answer, Daniel said. So I have decided. Evelyn said that I will mention only that the gift was received, and that after the ceremony privately, I will ask Rachel to read the letter. Not in front of everyone, just us. Is that acceptable? Evelyn. Is it acceptable, Daniel? It's more than acceptable, he said. It's yes, it's right. Good. The logistics portion of the call completed. Her voice shifted slightly, the way it shifted when she let something real surface. I did not sleep last night. Neither did I. Do you think Grace knows? She said, quietly. The question of someone who has been sitting with it alone for hours. Whatever comes after, do you think she knows about Thomas? About the girl? He thought about that for a moment. I think if there's anything after, he said, Grace knows everything, and I think she would be very pleased with herself for it. Evelyn made the sound that was not quite a laugh. She would be insufferable about it, she said. She would find some way to take credit. Absolutely, Daniel said. She would say she planned it. She probably did, Evelyn said, and then her voice went quiet again. I'll see you tonight. Tonight, he said. He picked up Rachel at the motel at 5:30. She was waiting outside the wooden box, under one arm dressed in a simple dark dress with her hair loose. She looked like someone who had prepared with great care for the exact right amount of formality, not overdressed, not underdressed, exactly calibrated for the weight of the occasion. She got in the car, and she looked at him, and she said, How are you? He started the car. I'm scared. Of what specifically? Of feeling too much, of not feeling enough, of both happening at the same time. That's just grief. Grief, Rachel said. I know, I'm used to grief. This is different. This is grief and something else at the same time, and I don't have a word for what the something else is. Rachel looked at him steadily. Hope, she said. The word is hope. It feels strange because you haven't used it in a while. He drove. The hospital grounds where the ceremony was held were already filling when they arrived. Families carrying lanterns. Small groups gathered under the trees in the early evening air. Children holding paper cards with names written in careful letters. The ceremony happened every year on the same date, always at dusk, always outside the building where Grace had worked and where Evelyn had stood at the microphone for 2 consecutive years with shaking hands and unshaking voice. Daniel spotted Evelyn immediately. She was near the podium speaking to the ceremony coordinator wearing her navy coat and the particular posture she assumed when she was managing something important, straight-backed, precise, completely in command of the space she occupied. She saw Daniel and Rachel approaching, and she did not flinch. She held the gaze, and then she held out one hand. Not to Daniel, to Rachel. Rachel stopped walking. Just for a fraction of a second her feet stopped, and Daniel felt it because they were standing close enough that he felt the hesitation move through her. Then she walked forward and took Evelyn's hand. Evelyn did not shake it. She held it. Thank you for coming back, Evelyn said. Thank you for asking me to, Rachel said. They stood like that for a moment. 2 women connected through death and gratitude, and 32 months of borrowed life, holding each other's hands in the gathering dusk outside a hospital, where one woman's daughter had worked, and another woman's father had found his heartbeat again. Then Evelyn let go and turned back to the coordinator and said something about the microphone positioning, because Evelyn was always going to return to logistics when the emotion got too large. And Daniel caught Rachel's eye, and Rachel's expression said everything words would have interrupted. The ceremony began at 6:45. The sky was the color of something ending and something else beginning. Simultaneously, the particular deep blue gold of late autumn dusk that has no exact name. Paper lanterns hung in the trees and more were being assembled by families along the pathway to the water. A string quartet played softly from the far end of the gathering. Daniel stood to Evelyn's right. Rachel stood to her left. When Evelyn stepped to the microphone, the crowd went quiet. In that specific way, crowds go quiet when they know something sacred is about to happen. She stood straight. She put her hands flat on the podium. She looked out at the gathered families, and she began. She said what she always said. The statistics, the meaning of donation, the gratitude of the hospital community. The specific ways that one decision made in an impossible moment could extend to touch lives that the donor never knew existed. She said it the way she had said it for 2 years clearly and without trembling, because Evelyn did not tremble at microphones. And then she said something she had never said before. 2 years ago I stood here, and I said my daughter's name into this microphone for the first time. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. This year I can tell you something I could not say then. Grace's gift was received. It was carried with care and with daily gratitude and with prayers for our family that I only learned about recently. I want the families here tonight who are in that first year of loss to hear this. The person who received your loved one's gift was thinking about you. They were carrying the weight of that gift with awareness of what it cost. You were not forgotten. You were not forgotten by the person who needed you most. The silence that followed was the kind that presses against the chest. Then Evelyn said, "Grace Ann Whitmore," clearly into the microphone, and her hands were shaking. Daniel could see them shaking from where he stood, but her voice did not shake. Her voice was exactly what it always was, precise and certain and full of love that had no place left to put itself except into the syllables of her daughter's name. Daniel felt the sound go through him like a current. And then, before the silence could close back in, Rachel stepped slightly forward. She looked at Evelyn. Evelyn gave her the smallest nod. Rachel leaned toward the microphone. "Thomas James Bennett," she said. Her voice was clear, steady. "Beloved father and grateful keeper of a precious gift." No one in the crowd knew who Thomas Bennett was. There was no reason they should. But something in the way Rachel said his name, the precision of it, the tenderness, the weight she gave each syllable made the air change. People leaned in slightly. A woman 2 rows back pressed her hand over her mouth. A man in a yellow jacket looked at his wife, and his wife looked back. 2 names, said into the same evening air. Daniel reached out and took Evelyn's hand on one side. Evelyn reached out and took Rachel's hand on the other. They stood in a line at the edge of the water, the widower, the mother, the daughter holding on to each other while the last light went down over the bay. Evelyn had brought 2 lanterns from home. She had not told Daniel this. She had simply arrived with them, 1 in each hand, and now she held one out to Rachel. They were plain paper lanterns, simple and white, and on each one, Evelyn had written a name in her careful schoolteacher handwriting. On one Grace, on the other Thomas. Rachel looked at the lantern with her father's name on it. She looked at Evelyn. "How did you?" "I told you," Evelyn said. "I texted her." Rachel laughed. It came out surprised and wet and real. The laugh of someone who had been holding something enormous and had just found an unexpected release valve. Daniel heard it, and something in his chest loosened in a way that had nothing to do with sorrow. They released the lanterns together, not on a count, not on a signal. Just both at the same moment, the way people do when they are paying close enough attention to each other that the moment becomes obvious. The 2 lanterns lifted and drifted out over the water side by side. The current pulled them gently apart and then back together, and for a few seconds they moved in the same direction before the dark water took them. No one spoke. Then Evelyn said very quietly to no one in particular, "There they go," after the ceremony. They found a bench near the water away from the crowd, and Evelyn sat between them, and Rachel opened the wooden box and took out the finished letter and read it aloud while the last of the lanterns still floated on the bay. She read it the way she had read it at the cemetery that morning, steadily, without ornamentation, letting the words do what they were built to do. Evelyn listened with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the water, and Daniel watched Evelyn's face more than he watched Rachel, because Evelyn's face was where the real story was happening. He saw the moment the words reached her. It was the section about the surgery, about Thomas waking up and hearing the heartbeat, about the nurse asking if he was in pain, and Thomas saying no, someone loved someone enough to say yes. Evelyn's hands tightened in her lap. Her jaw set. And one tear came down her right cheek, just one, and she did not wipe it away. She let it go wherever it was going. When Rachel finished, they sat in silence. Then Evelyn said, "He kept her photograph. Beside his medication cabinet," Rachel said, "from the day he found out her name. Every day. Every day." Evelyn nodded. She looked at the water for a long moment. Then she said, "He didn't steal anything. He was a custodian." She turned the word over like she was testing its weight. A custodian of something he knew was not originally his, and he treated it accordingly. "Yes," Rachel said. "That's exactly what he was." Evelyn looked at Daniel. "You understand what I'm about to say." "Tell me," he said. "I have been keeping Grace frozen," she said. "The same way you kept the apartment frozen. I have been keeping her at 39 in a parking lot on a Tuesday in April. As if that is the entirety of her. As if nothing she did before that Tuesday matters as much as the way she left." She pressed her lips together. Thomas had 32 months to remember what she did before that Tuesday. He lived inside what she did before that Tuesday. And in a way, she stopped. She started again. "In a way, he gave her back to me, not the loss, the life." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had been said, and everything that did not need to be said, full of Grace and Thomas, and 2 years of parallel grief that had finally found each other on the same bench, at the same water, at the end of the same impossible day. Rachel reached into the wooden box one final time. She took out the fabric heart. She held it out to Evelyn. Evelyn looked at it. Her hands came up slowly, and she took it and turned it over. She found the button. She looked at Daniel. He said, "Go ahead." She pressed it. The heartbeat came through in the evening air, small and steady, and impossibly real, the recorded sound of a heart that had been Grace's before it was Thomas's, that had beaten in 2 bodies, and prayed for 2 families, and been carried with the full weight of everything it represented. Evelyn held it in both hands, and closed her eyes and breathed. No one spoke. She sat like that for a long time. Then she opened her eyes, and she looked at Rachel, and she said, "When you go back to Richmond, will you come back?" Rachel blinked. Yes, of course." "Good," Evelyn said. She turned the fabric heart over in her hands one more time. "I have questions. About his life. About the grandchildren. About the fishing boat." She looked up. "I want to know everything your father did with the time he was given. I think I need to know it. I think knowing it will help me understand that her life didn't end in a parking lot. It kept going. In ways she never knew about." "I'll tell you everything," Rachel said. Evelyn handed the fabric heart back to Rachel. "You should keep that," she said. "It was your father's. It belongs with you." "It belongs with both of us," Rachel said. "Then keep it," Evelyn said firmly. "And bring it when you come back." She stood. She straightened her coat with both hands, the way she always straightened it when a piece of business had been concluded. She looked at both of them, Rachel and Daniel, on either side of the bench in the dark at the water's edge, and her expression was complex and layered and real. The expression of someone who has just moved something very heavy to a different part of themselves, and is not sure yet what will grow in the space it left. "I'm going home," she said. "I'm going to call my son in Baltimore, and I'm going to tell him about Thomas." She paused. "And then I'm going to sit in Grace's chair, the one she always sat in when she visited the big armchair in the corner, and I'm going to think about what custodian means, about the kind of person who could carry something that heavy with that much care." She walked away from the bench. Daniel and Rachel watched her go. After a moment, Rachel said, "She's remarkable." "She really is," Daniel said. "Grace was lucky." "Grace would dispute that," Daniel said. "She would say, luck had nothing to do with it. She specifically chose to be born into a family with a remarkable mother, and she would like credit for the decision." Rachel laughed again, and this time it was fully real, fully open, the laugh of someone who is no longer holding anything back, because the thing they came here to deliver has been delivered, and they can breathe. now can exist in this place without the weight of the unfinished task pressing against their ribs. They sat on the bench in the dark for a while longer, not talking much, watching the last lanterns move out on the water. Every so often, one would dim and go quiet, and another would still be bright in the distance. And there was something in the staggered going of the lights that felt like the truth about grief, which is that it does not end all at once, and it does not end the same way for any two people, and that is not a failure. It is just the shape of it. Daniel said eventually, "I asked you a question this morning." Rachel looked at him. "I told you to ask me again in a week," she said. "It's been about 12 hours. That's not a week, I know." He looked at her. "But I think I need to say something now while the night is still tonight before I talk myself out of it." He turned to face her fully. "I don't want to wait a week. I don't want to wait for everything to settle and all the logistics to align, and for there to be some clean, uncomplicated moment to tell you that what I feel for you is real. Because there won't be a clean moment. There's not going to be a version of this that is uncomplicated. And if I keep waiting for the complicated parts to resolve before I say the honest things, I'll be waiting the rest of my life." Rachel was very still. "I love Grace," he said. "I am going to love Grace until I die. That is not going to change, and I'm not asking it to change, and I don't want it to." He held her gaze. "And I am beginning to love you. I don't know yet what shape that love is going to take. I don't know if it looks like the things I had with Grace or something entirely different. I just know it's real, and it's mine, and it doesn't take anything away from her. And I needed you to know that. Tonight. Before you go back to Richmond, and I spend a week telling myself I should have said it tonight." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. The water moved. A remaining lantern floated past in the dark. "Tragedy introduced us," she said quietly. "Yes. And you're saying that doesn't get to decide what we become." He almost smiled. "I was going to say that, yes." She looked at the water. "I came here to fulfill my father's dying wish," she said. "And somewhere along the way, it stopped being only that. And that scares me, because I don't know how to separate what I feel from how we got here. I don't know if the grief made it, or if it was always real, and the grief just made the space for it." "Does it matter?" he said. "I think it might. Or," he said carefully, "maybe the grief and the real thing aren't two different things. Maybe they came from the same place. Maybe you can't separate them, because separating them would make both of them smaller than they actually are." She turned to look at him. "Ask me the question again," she said. He knew which one she meant. "When this is over, when Richmond is where it is, and Annapolis is where it is, and 2 hours is the distance between them, what do you want?" She looked at him for 3 full seconds. "I want to come back," she said. "Not just for Evelyn. Not just for the letter, or the ceremony, or my father's unfinished business. I want to come back because this—" She gestured between them. The small movement that meant all of it. The bench and the cemetery and the bay and the radio station and the cafe where he had proposed, and the burned pasta and the 12 hours of phone calls across 200 miles. "This is mine too. Whatever this is. It's mine, and I don't want to walk away from it." He reached over and took her hand. She held on. They sat like that while the last light went off the water and the lanterns continued their slow, untroubled drift out into the dark, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing more that needed saying that night, because some things take the whole weight of silence to become real, and this was one of them. On the drive home, Rachel held the wooden box on her lap and looked out the window, and after about 15 minutes, she said without turning, "He would be happy, my dad. He would be so happy right now." "You think so?" "He spent 2 years trying to find a way to tell you something, and it almost destroyed him the not saying it." She turned to look at Daniel now. "And tonight, 3 women and 1 man stood at the edge of the Chesapeake Bay and said 2 names into the same air and sent 2 lanterns out on the same water. And a woman who thought she would never be ready asked me to come back." She shook her head slightly. "He would not believe it. He would absolutely not believe it. Grace wouldn't either," Daniel said. "Maybe that's why they would have gotten along," Rachel said. They both would have been wrong about the same thing. He dropped her at the motel and sat in the parking lot until her light came on inside. The same way he always sat in the parking lot until her light came on, because he had started doing that during the first week, and it had become a thing he did without deciding to. He drove home. He went inside. Grace's coat was still on the hook by the door. It was the last thing. He had kept everything else donated. Everything else made his decisions about everything else, and the coat was the last thing. He stood in front of it for a moment. Then he reached out and lifted it carefully from the hook. He held it against his chest, the same way he had held the fabric heart against his chest that morning. Same gesture, same instinct. Some things the body knows before the mind gets there. "I'm not putting you down," he said to Grace, to the coat, to whatever version of Grace existed in the charcoal wool and the cedar smell and the particular shape of a collar that had been against her neck 1,000 times. "I'm just putting you somewhere that isn't the door. Because the door is where you put things you're afraid to lose, and I don't need to be afraid anymore." He carried the coat to the bedroom. He hung it in the closet in the space he had cleared where her things had been. He stood in the doorway of the closet for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen, and he called Evelyn. She picked up on the second ring. "I knew you'd call," she said. "How are you?" "I called my son," she said. He cried. He said Thomas sounded like the kind of man Grace would have wanted to help. A pause. "He's right. She would have picked him herself." "Yes," Daniel said. "She would have." "And the girl," Evelyn said. "Rachel. She's—" A pause. Choosing words. Evelyn always chose words carefully and precisely. "She has a quality I recognize." "What quality?" "She shows up," Evelyn said. "She shows up even when she's afraid. Even when she might be turned away. She drives 2 hours in the dark, and she stands at a microphone, and she says a dead man's name in front of strangers because it was the right thing to do." A pause. Grace did that. Showed up even when the showing up was the most frightening option. Daniel was quiet. "I'm not saying anything," Evelyn said carefully. "I'm just observing." "I know," Daniel said. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Evelyn." He sat in the quiet apartment and thought about showing up. About the specific courage required to be the person who shows up when showing up is the most frightening option available. About Grace, who had done that every day of her adult life. About Thomas, who had shown up imperfectly in 31 failed attempts, but who had kept trying until the last conscious days of his life. About Rachel, who had driven to a cemetery before sunrise and knelt in the wet grass and cried over a name on a stone because her father had asked her to carry something he couldn't carry himself. And about himself. About Daniel Whitmore, who had arrived at a grave with gardenias every Sunday for 2 years. Not because it was brave, but because it was the only thing he knew how to do, and who was sitting now in an apartment that felt different than it had 2 weeks ago, with a coat hung in a closet and a wooden box on his kitchen counter, and 2 phone numbers in his phone that had not been there before. He picked up his phone. He texted Rachel. "You okay?" 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, "Yeah. You," he typed. "Better than I've been in 2 years." A pause. Then her reply. "Me too." He put the phone down and looked at the kitchen counter and the wooden box, and thought about what came next. The 2-hour drive, the teaching job in Richmond, the radio program, the rebuilding that was still in early stages, and would require patience and time, and the willingness to let things be complicated for as long as they needed to be complicated. I was ready for that. For the first time, he was genuinely ready for that. I went to the kitchen and made tea, not coffee. Tea, which was what Grace had always made when the day was over and the night was for thinking, and he stood at the window and looked at the bay in the dark, and he let himself feel all of it, the grief and the gratitude and the fear and the hope and the specific, irreplaceable love for a woman who had died with her heart and left it beating in the world, and the newer, different, just as real thing growing in the space that grief, over 2 impossible years, had slowly, stubbornly, magnificently made room for. He stood there for a long time. The bay did what the bay always did. The night did what the night does. And Daniel Whitmore, widower radio host man with gardenias. In his hand every Sunday at 6 in the morning, stood at his kitchen window and drank his tea, and let himself believe, not carefully this time, not with the caution of someone protecting a fragile thing, but fully and completely, and without apology. The way Grace had always believed things, the way she had woken up every morning, like the day was a gift she intended to use. He let himself believe it was going to be okay. Not the same, not without grief, but okay. And that after 2 years of not being able to believe anything at all, felt like the most extraordinary thing in the world. The 2-hour drive between Annapolis and Richmond became the most familiar road Daniel had ever known. He started making it every weekend in December. Every Friday night after the radio show wrapped at 5 in the morning, he would drive home, sleep 4 hours, then get in the car and head south. Rachel would have coffee ready when he arrived. They would spend Saturday doing nothing remarkable grocery shopping, grading her students' papers at the kitchen table, while he read, arguing about which restaurant was worth the drive. Sunday mornings he made the drive back so he could be at Chesapeake Memorial with gardenias before sunrise. He did not miss a single Sunday at Grace's grave. Rachel never asked him to. That mattered more than she knew. January arrived cold, and the drives got harder, but he kept making them. February. Rachel started driving north on alternate weekends, staying at the same Bay Road motel the first 2 times, and then Daniel told her that was ridiculous, that he had a guest room, and the motel was $20 cheaper than reasonable, and she should just stay, and she did. The first morning she woke up in his apartment and came into the kitchen and found him making eggs and the radio playing low in the background. Something shifted between them. Something domestic and ordinary and quietly enormous. And neither of them mentioned it directly, but Daniel turned the eggs and Rachel poured the coffee, and it felt like practice for something. Evelyn called Daniel every Sunday the same as always. But now the calls were different. She asked about Rachel. She asked specific questions: how the third graders were doing with their reading unit, whether Rachel had found a good mechanic in Richmond after her car made the noise, whether Daniel had told Rachel about the Portuguese vacation deposit, yet the one he had never touched, the money still sitting in an account he hadn't known what to do with. He had not told her yet. He told her in February on a Saturday evening when they were sitting at his kitchen table after dinner. He said there was money he and Grace had set aside for a trip to Portugal that never happened, and he had been keeping it in an account because every time he thought about what to do with it, he couldn't make a decision, and he thought maybe they should go. Not to Portugal specifically. Just go somewhere. Use it for something that was about being alive, rather than about being afraid. Rachel looked at him across the table. "You're asking me to go on a trip with you," she said. "I'm suggesting the possibility of a trip." "Daniel." "I'm asking you to go on a trip with me," he admitted. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Portugal. Or anywhere," he said. "Wherever. It doesn't have to be Portugal. Grace chose Portugal, and I'm not trying to recreate something. I just want to use the money for something good." "I think Grace would like Portugal," Rachel said carefully. "I think she chose it for a reason." "She chose it because she wanted to see the tiles," Daniel said. "She had a whole thing about the azulejo tiles. She had a book about them." "I know," Rachel said. He stopped. "How do you know that?" "Evelyn told me." "A beat. We talk more than you realize." He absorbed that. "How much more?" "She called me on a Thursday 2 weeks ago to ask if I thought you were eating enough vegetables," Rachel said. "So, considerably more." Daniel pressed his hand over his face. "She's taking care of you through me," Rachel said. "She doesn't know how to just call you and ask if you're eating vegetables. That's not how Evelyn operates. But she can call me." "That is either the most touching or the most alarming thing I've heard this month," he said. "Both," Rachel said. "Definitely both." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "I'll go to Portugal," she said. "But not yet. Not this year. This year I think we still need the drives. I think we need the ordinary before we do the extraordinary." "Okay," he said. "Next year," she said. "Ask me next year." He turned his hand over and held hers. "I'll ask you next year." Spring came. Rachel's third graders finished their reading unit and started a science project about water cycles. Daniel changed his radio program. Once a month on the first Friday, he opened the phone lines to a different kind of conversation, not just grief in general, but specifically the grief that lived at the intersection of donation and loss. The complicated space where donor families and recipients existed in parallel without always knowing how to reach each other. He called it simply the First Friday Conversation, no formal title, no produced segment. Just the lines open and the invitation spoken quietly at midnight. If you have a story about what was given and what it cost and what it made possible, call in. We're listening. The first Friday, 3 people called. By April, he was getting 40 calls before the show even started, and the station had to add 2 additional phone operators to handle the volume. People had been waiting a long time for somewhere to put this. Evelyn listened to every First Friday broadcast. She told Daniel this in March casually, the way she reported information she considered factual rather than personal. She said, "I listened to your First Fridays. I think Grace would have been very good at that program. She would have been impatient with the callers who took too long to get to the point, but very good at it." "She would have told them to speed it up," Daniel said. "She absolutely would have," Evelyn said. "I told her that was a professional liability, and she said that was called being direct, and she considered it a feature." They laughed at the same time. It was the first time Daniel could remember laughing with Evelyn without the laugh having a shadow underneath it. In April, exactly 2 years and 12 months after Grace died on a Tuesday morning in a hospital parking lot, Rachel came to Annapolis and did not go back. It was not a dramatic announcement. There was no single moment of decision that Daniel could point to afterward and say, that was it. That was when everything changed. It happened the way most real things happen, gradually, and then all at once. Her school year ended. She had applied for a position at an elementary school in Annapolis in February. She found out in March she had gotten it. In April, she gave notice on her Richmond apartment, and Daniel helped her move in 2 car trips and 1 rented van. And by the end of a long Saturday, she was unpacking boxes in the 2nd bedroom of his apartment while he assembled a bookshelf from pieces that had been packaged with instructions he was nearly certain were missing 3 steps. "You're doing that wrong," she said from across the room without looking up from a box of books. "I know what I'm doing," he said. "The bracket goes on the other side." He looked at the bracket. He looked at the instructions. He flipped the bracket. "Better," he said. "Much," she said. It was the most ordinary conversation in the world, and it felt like something sacred, because ordinary and sacred are not as far apart as people think. And Daniel had learned that from Grace, who had known it from the beginning, and had left enough of the lesson behind in the world that he was still learning it. Rachel did not move into the master bedroom. They were not there yet, and they both knew it, and neither of them needed to say so. She took the 2nd bedroom and made it hers. Her books, her 3rd grade classroom photos, her father's fishing boat model that she had kept from his house, a small framed print on the wall that had hung in her Richmond apartment for 6 years. She made the space hers without erasing the fact that it was also his, and that careful, instinctive respect for the difference was one of the things Daniel thought about late at night when the apartment was quiet and he was trying to understand what it was about Rachel Bennett that felt like both a new beginning and a return to something he had thought was permanently gone. Then came the day in May that he had not planned for. He had been looking at the cemetery plots map that the groundskeeper had given him when he asked 6 months ago about the area near Grace's grave. Not for himself. Not yet. For Thomas. He brought it up to Rachel on a Sunday evening, carefully aware that this was not a small thing. "I've been thinking," he said. She looked up from her grading. "About Thomas," he said. "About where he is. In Richmond. He's in the family plot," Rachel said slowly. "My grandmother's plot. He always said that's where he wanted to go." "Is that where you want him?" She set her pen down. "What are you thinking?" she said. "I'm thinking." He paused. He carried Grace for 32 months. He prayed for her family every night. He kept her photograph. He sent his daughter to find us. He looked at Rachel steadily. "I'm thinking that a man like that deserves to be somewhere near the person who made his last years possible. Not because it's sentimental, Because it's true. Rachel was completely still. You want to bring him here, she said. Only if you want that, Daniel said. Only if it feels right to you. I'm not trying to rewrite anything. I think Grace would want him nearby. I think she would find it right. Rachel pressed her hand over her mouth. The gesture that was Evelyn's gesture, that was grief's gesture, that crossed generations and families and strangers who had been made into something resembling kin by the most unlikely thread. I need to call my brother, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. He would need to agree. He has as much say as I do. Of course, Daniel said. She called her brother that night. Daniel sat in the kitchen and gave her the living room, which was the closest thing to privacy their apartment offered, and he could hear the conversation in the other room, but could not make out the words. Just the cadences. Rachel's voice rising and then leveling a long silence that meant her brother was talking. Then Rachel's voice again lower, and then another silence, and then something that sounded like agreement. She came into the kitchen 20 minutes later. He said yes, she said. He said Dad always talked about Grace. He said he thought Dad would... She stopped, cleared her throat. He said it makes sense. He said Thomas would have wanted to be where he could keep praying. Daniel nodded. He did not trust his voice right then. In June, Thomas Bennett was laid to rest in Chesapeake Memorial Cemetery. The headstone was simple and gray, placed several rows from Grace's grave close enough that the walk between them took less than a minute. On it, Rachel had chosen the inscription that felt most completely true. Thomas Bennett, beloved father, grateful keeper of a precious gift. The day they unveiled the headstone was a Thursday morning, quiet and overcast. Just Daniel and Rachel and Evelyn and Rachel's brother Marcus, who drove down from Baltimore with his wife, and who stood at the graveside with his hands in his coat pockets and his jaw set. The way people set their jaws when they are not going to cry but are working very hard at it. Evelyn had brought gardenias, not one bunch. 2. She walked to Grace's grave first and laid the first bunch. Then she walked to Thomas's grave and laid the second. She stood at Thomas's headstone for a moment, reading the inscription, and then she turned to Rachel. Grateful keeper, she said. That was the right choice. I thought so, Rachel said. It was his word, Evelyn said. Custodian, you made it better. She reached out and took Rachel's hand briefly, the same gesture as the ceremony, firm and deliberate and full of everything. Evelyn did not say with words, and then she let go and straightened her coat. Marcus shook Daniel's hand and then unexpectedly pulled him into a brief, solid embrace. Thank you, he said quietly, for being the kind of person who thought of this. It was the right thing, Daniel said. Yeah, Marcus said. It was. They stood together at Thomas's grave, the 5 of them in the quiet, overcast morning, and no one felt the need to fill the silence with ceremony. They had already had the ceremony. This was something else, something smaller and more permanent than ceremony. This was just people standing together at the right place at the right time, which is most of what love requires. 1 year later, Daniel and Rachel created the Grace and Thomas Listening Project. It grew directly from the First Friday broadcasts, a nonprofit built around the idea that donor families and transplant recipients deserved a safe, structured space to find each other, if they chose to tell the truths they had been carrying in silence, to grieve and be grateful in the same room, without being forced to perform either emotion for the benefit of an audience. Rachel ran the community coordination. Daniel handled the broadcast component. Evelyn joined the advisory board, which she announced by calling Daniel on a Sunday evening and saying without preamble, I want a role, a real one, not a figurehead. Done, Daniel said. Good, she said. I'll need business cards. Evelyn. With the title, she said. Whatever title means something. I'll handle the business cards, he said. She hung up satisfied. The project's first year connected 47 donor families with transplant recipients who had been too frightened to reach out. Some of those connections became friendships. Some remained a single phone call, a single exchange of letters, a single answer to the question that had been living in the back of the mind for years. Did they know? Did they think about us? Did what we gave mean something? The answer in 47 cases out of 47 was yes. The night. Daniel realized the project was working. Really working, not in a press release way, but in a lives being changed way. He was sitting behind the microphone at midnight, and a woman called from somewhere in rural Pennsylvania and said she was the recipient of a kidney from a 19-year-old boy named Jake, who had died in a car accident 6 years ago, and she had never had the courage to contact Jake's parents because she didn't know what she could possibly say that wouldn't make everything worse. And she had heard about the project on Daniel's broadcast, and she had reached out, and Jake's mother had called her back within an hour, and Jake's mother had said, "We have been waiting. We have been waiting for someone to tell us he is still doing something in the world." The woman on the phone was crying. Daniel was not far behind her. After the call, he looked through the studio glass. Rachel was in her chair on the other side, the same chair she had been in the first morning. She showed up at the station with 2 cups of good coffee, and the fabric heart was on the corner of his desk, where it always was during broadcasts, now small and dark. Thomas's gift, Grace's heartbeat preserved in the quiet mechanics of a tiny recorded sound. He picked it up. He did not press the button. He just held it for a moment, the weight of it familiar in his hand now, and he thought about Grace, who had said gardenias smelled like the beginning of every good thing. He thought about Thomas, who had woken up in a recovery room and cried because someone loved someone enough to say yes. He thought about Evelyn, who had stood at a podium with shaking hands and unshaking voice for 3 years in a row, and who now had business cards with a title that meant something. He thought about Rachel, who had driven through the dark to a cemetery and knelt in the wet grass and said a name she owed nothing to because her father had asked her not to let the gift be forgotten. He leaned toward the microphone. He said, "Sometimes a stranger enters your life carrying the last thing you thought you had lost. They cannot return the person you loved, but they may help you understand that love never stopped moving. It found another heart. It kept going. And if you are very lucky and very brave, it will find its way back to you." He pressed play on Grace's favorite piano song. Through the studio glass, Rachel looked up. She smiled. Daniel smiled back, not with guilt, not with the particular heaviness that had lived in every smile for 2 years. The weight of feeling like joy was a betrayal. Just smiled, fully, freely. The way a man smiles when he is where he is supposed to be doing what he is supposed to do. Sitting across a pane of glass from the person who showed up at the right moment and stayed. And when the sun comes up over the Chesapeake Bay in an hour, he will go to Grace's grave with gardenias, and he will tell her about the woman on the phone from Pennsylvania, and about Jake's mother, who said we have been waiting, and he will tell her about Thomas's headstone and the gardenias. Evelyn divides every week between 2 graves without being asked, and he will tell her that the apartment is full again. Not of another person's things, arranged as a shrine to loss, but of 2 people's ordinary lives in the same space, their books mixed on the same shelves, their coffee cups side by side in the cabinet, where once only one remained untouched. He will tell her all of it. Because that is what he does. That is the ritual that has not changed. He shows up, he cleans the headstone, he talks to Grace, and then he walks back to the car and drives home to the life that grief made room for. Grace died on a Tuesday morning in April. Her heart kept beating for 32 more months in another man's chest. That man's daughter drove 2 hours and knelt in the wet grass of a cemetery before sunrise to make sure his gratitude was not forgotten. And out of that, out of a parking lot and a donation card, and 31 unfinished letters, and one woman who showed up anyway, came something that none of them could have planned, and none of them deserved, and all of them needed. Love does not end. It finds another way. It always finds another way.